In the quiet enclave of Chuluota, Florida, a family tragedy unfolded that gripped the nation. The Amato family, a mother, father and two sons, were an absolute image of suburban stability until January 2019, when the family was torn apart by a harrowing crime. 3 members of the same family were found dead in their home, victims of a cold-blooded murder. The surviving son, Grant Amato, became the prime suspect. His life unravelled by an obsession with an online cam girl that led him down a dark path. As the investigation deepened, it exposed a tangle of virtual fantasy and financial ruin. The question that loomed large: did Grant Amato cross the line from the virtual world into a violent reality? This is the case of the Amato family annihilation. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I've been asked to cover this case a lot of times and it's taken me a while to do so because arguably I don't always want to cover cases that have been largely covered elsewhere, but I am hoping that the research I've done on it will give you some new insight and you'll go away if you've seen cases covered on this particular one before with something new to add to your understanding and knowledge. I am always blown away when we talk about family annihilation, when it comes down to what we expect from the people that we spend our lives with, grow up with, are born to, are loved by. The idea that we could ever find ourselves in a position where we wanted to take their life just seems so outside the realms of ration. But nonetheless, we see it play out. It's rare, but it happens. And it always leads us to ask those big questions. Do we really ever truly know the people that we share our homes with? This case highlights that at times we really don't. Also, before I start, just want to say a massive thank you to all my YouTube community supporters. Thank you. And all my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much, guys. Can't do this without you. You make my world such a great place because it gives me opportunities to create this content and I love doing this. So I appreciate it very, very much. Right, let's get on with today's case. So Chad and Margaret Amato, they're living in Sultan Circle in Chuluota, Florida. They've got this beautiful home with respect. It's on this really large plot of land. And the two were said to consider themselves real soulmates. They were so happy together in their relationship. Margaret had had a son from a previous marriage called Jason, and he was actually adopted by Chad and genuinely considered his son. So this is not a dysfunctional relationship. Jason has a very close relationship with his parents and considers his adopted father his father. And I think that says something amazing about Chad because of the fact that sometimes it can be very difficult when you're taking in children who might not biologically be yours. We see that play out in divorce rates where people become stepfamilies, but that just isn't the case where Chad and Margaret are concerned. And it's testament to the type of human beings that they are. Now, Margaret and Chad go on to have 2 sons together, Cody and Grant. Cody was born on September the 22nd, 1987, and Grant was born on 20th of May, 1989. So Cody and Grant were born 2 years apart. I have boys who were born 2 years apart. Yes, it can be turbulent at times, but very rarely with respect. They're really good mates. So when you're bringing up kids with that kind of age gap, very often they just become incredibly close. And it's the case for Cody and Grant. They're said to be absolutely inseparable. The family were huge football fans and they were quite a privileged family. They did well financially, so they even went to every Florida Gators home game. So they did things together. They enjoyed common interests. They had common values. And this really just bode well when you think about a life as a family member. It seems like there are these common interests and connectors, and add to that financial stability and security. You're genuinely in a situation where you have the really lucky privilege to thrive. Margaret was a lovely human being. She apparently had this huge love for horses, and horses are used as therapy animals because they are so empathic, they're so sensitive. So when they're wounded or injured or abused, understandably, it can be very hard for horses to trust the world again, and Margaret knew this. She actually rescued horses and she would look after them on their land, and she had a particular connection with the animals that were abused or had been literally left for dead. So she really wanted to bring them back to health. She wanted to get them to have that level of trust in humans that had been broken, and she never gave up on it, no matter how many times the horse might throw her off. She just fully believed that with the right care and attention, love and trust, that they could become the animals that they deserved to be once again. And I think that that brings a side of her into sharp focus, because somebody who has that dedication and commitment to the most broken of beings and believes in better for them, that's testament to the kind of personality and nurture that she would offer her own children. And Chad, well, we already know he was happy to adopt Margaret's son, so we can understand that there's a level of compassion there anyway. But he's described by people who knew him as really caring. He was apparently very encouraging as a father. He was very encouraging as a husband. He was a great dad, and he was a great partner. Margaret was described by people who knew her as sweet, calm, intelligent, compassionate. And Cody, Grant's brother, he was described as being a very caring, positive, and amazing individual who had a huge heart. The Amato family were basically an American success story. They were living the American dream. They lived in this beautiful home. They had this tight familial unit. They were basically the absolute definition of success. And they actually were a family of medical professionals. So Chad, he worked as a clinical pharmacist. He was also somebody who worked in computers and was amazing at that. And Margaret worked as an operations manager in medical coding. So they were financially in a very good position. And both Grant and Cody would actually follow the parents into the medical field. Looking back at how they were in high school, well, they were fine. They became apparently interested in health and wellness pretty early in their adolescence. They joined the school's weightlifting team. Apparently they were known to really push each other in the gyms. They kind of were each other's buddies. And after high school, Grant joined Cody at the University of Central Florida. And I would say that this is probably where things begin to slide. And they don't just change for Grant, they change for the entire Amato family. So we've got Grant and Cody both on the same career path at this moment. So they were both going to go through nursing school and then to anesthesiology school. So this was a very clear commitment to a career path that they were both decided on. And I find it interesting that Grant is following Cody in his career path, like exactly. So literally following in his footsteps. And on one level that can make you think, well, that's because he was genuinely interested in the field and potentially he holds his brother in high esteem, and the decisions that Cody makes, Grant wants to make also. But it could also mean that he really doesn't have his own aspirations. Some people genuinely don't have a particular connection with any type of career goals. They maybe have interests in other things completely alternative to that, but they know that there is an expectation on them to perform, but because they have no vocation, no passion, etc., they just take the road that they see somebody else treading, because first of all, it probably means that they'll have somebody who can help them along or drag them along. In this case, it could be that Cody can help him with his own studies because he's gone before him. And essentially, it does make me wonder whether Grant was just going through the motions of getting involved in a career that he wasn't potentially massively interested in. Now, after they graduated, the plan was that these two were going to buy matching BMWs, and apparently they were going to end up buying their parents' house. Chad and Margaret had actually bought a house in Tennessee that they were going to retire to. So this is the plan. Cody and Grant Amato decided that this is how it's all going to play out, and Cody did stick to his plan. But Grant, unfortunately, had difficulties. And when we say difficulties, shall we say we're putting that in the loosest of terms, because difficulties really doesn't cut it when it comes down to the actions that Grant got involved in. So first of all, only Cody actually completes this path as it is. So he does succeed as a nurse. He does his course and he goes and works as a nurse anaesthetist at Orlando Regional Medical Centre. So he has stuck to that path and plan, but Grant hasn't. So Grant doesn't complete the anaesthetist course, but he still does manage to carry on working in a medical field. He gets a job as a nurse at Advent Health, that's it in Orlando. But it doesn't go too well, because Grant finds himself getting fired in 2018. And the reason for that is he'd been found to have stolen some prescription drugs. He'd taken at least 8 bottles of propofol. Now that in itself is really worrying, because to steal propofol and to do that when you are meant to be in a position where firstly you're trained to know better, and secondly it's clear what the ramifications of such actions would be, which likely would mean you lose your job, and to go ahead down that action anyway suggests that you're somebody who has poor consequential thinking. It's massively problematic to be caught doing something like this when you work in that field. How to end your career pretty instantaneously. It turns out he'd stolen over $2,000 worth of drugs. Now, it was alleged that he had wrongly administered sedatives to patients, as he believed that the pain management they were being provided wasn't adequate, but we can't evidence that that's the case. Although it's a nice little hero story, isn't it? Oh, well, I lost my job and got done for gross misconduct because I was just trying to ease the pain of people who were struggling with their pain management. Not your job to do. The whole reason you're a nurse is so that you can get the prescriptions correct. And if you need to get better prescriptions and higher doses, then surely you're going to be able to speak to a medical professional above you who can do that potentially. But I think it was likely he was trying to carve out this story where it made him look less responsible and accountable, painting himself in the best picture possible, as opposed to being somebody who's just a thief. Grant did later recall that one of the big problems for him from that point onwards was that it really upset his dad. Yes, Grant, it's going to. It's pretty embarrassing when your father's done very well in the medical field to find out that his son stole drugs and lost his job. He actually said this. With him, it was every single day, hours a day. He'd come home from work and he'd just talk to me about the same exact thing over and over. Yes, it's what parents do. Just throwing it out there, Grant. Parents really do not enjoy it when you bring a level of shame and embarrassment on the family. And it was a choice, Grant, to go ahead and do what you did. And now you're expecting the support of your family, both on an environmental level because they house you, and on an economic level because you've now got no money, because you've not got a job. Now, after Grant gets fired from Advent Health for his actions, he also actually got arrested for grand larceny by the Orlando police. That was because of the drugs that he'd taken and that apparently administered. But the hospital didn't actually end up pressing charges against Grant, so he was released without facing any criminal charges. Somehow the charges were dropped, possibly from Cody's brother, paying $8,000 for his brother's lawyer. And one of the things that I'm going to say about Cody right now is this is the kind of brother everybody wants, because Cody just seems to be somebody who is both forgiving and hopeful of the potential for his brother's redemption in his actions in the future, thus trying to support him whenever he gets himself into hot water, which is really sad when we get to the reality of what happens to Cody at the hands of that very brother he was often trying to save. But there are problems for Grant now because he's lost his job, he can't find a job in the medical field, and that means that he's economically in a situation that's going to be problematic. He just tried to look for other jobs, but in the end, he decides he's going to become a Twitch streamer. I kid you not. Yeah. Grant Amato is like, at the end of the day, I need to think about a job that's probably going to bring in a reasonable amount of money, having lost my job as a medical professional. So I should think about the very stable and easy to acquire career of being a Twitch streamer. I mean, the immaturity level of this individual is mind-blowing. It isn't easy to become a streamer and make money. But this was his idea. He's going to play video games, going to live stream himself doing that, and I don't know, because he's such an incredible charismatic individual, people will just join it, pay him a huge amount of money through their views, and he'll probably be able to buy himself a BMW and a home in the Bahamas. But this is what he's going to do. He's going to get paid through his audience, and he's going to give tips, and he's going to get subscriptions, and everyone's going to be happy because even though he's completely screwed up his life so far, this is going to rebuild it. Now, his family, with respect, were pretty amazing. They supported him. And I don't know about you, but if my boys came to me and were like, I've lost my job because I did something really bad, and now I'm going to become a YouTuber or a Twitch streamer or an Instagrammer, I'd be like, okay, I'm all for helping you pursue your dreams, but could we also additionalize that in with, I don't know, some part-time work in a bar, for example? But his parents obviously are in a situation where financially they're in a good place. So his dad and his brother, they actually hand over their credit cards so that he can go and buy equipment, he can buy advertising. But unsurprisingly, Grant wasn't very good at getting any success with this career path. So first of all, if you want to be a Twitch streamer, I'm going to throw it out there, life advice guys, you actually have to stream. But he wasn't somebody who did that. So he was inconsistent, he rarely streamed, and he was making less than $150 a month from his channel. So this apparently led to a downward spiral for Grant. Now, we've all had dreams that haven't worked out. Let's be honest. For example, I may once have dreamt that I'd have liked to have been a Victoria's Secrets model, but that would have meant I had to have a head and body transplant. Sometimes the dreams that I didn't, by the way, I've never dreamt of that because I'm realistic. What I'm saying is, you have sometimes these ideas and you realise down the line that it's just not going to work out, and that's okay. And Grant should have realised twitching isn't for me. At the end of the day, it's not something that I'm perfectly suited to, or I'd be more committed and passionate to it. But no, because Grant has this idea that his life should be as he wishes for it to be, it's devastating for him. And I would bring in at this point, when we consider what a narcissist is, when we're talking about true narcissistic personality disorder, we're talking about an individual who has an arrogance and a superiority, an entitlement. That's what we would say, a level of entitlement to who they are and what they believe their life should be. But at the root of that tends to be a very insecure individual. So all of these aloof, entitled behaviours, it shields the reality, which is this person at the root of it knows that they're not actually that great at all. And as a defence mechanism, they operate in a world around them by pretending that they're better, albeit knowing somewhere at the heart that they aren't. And I think that Grant starts to evidence that this is a part of his personality makeup without a doubt. So it hasn't worked out for him. That's not how his life should play out. He wants things to come easily. And that's another thing. It seems that Grant does not believe that working hard is important to gain your money. He has an entitlement and believes that his life should provide him with whatever he wishes and wants, even if he doesn't actually make the effort to achieve it. There's always somebody else that he can take from to get what he desires. And in this case, obviously, we do have his parents and his brother helping him out. So that's reaffirming that belief system. But it comes down to that gross level of entitlement. If you mess your life up, it is not for anybody else to help you out. It's not for anybody else to reach in and pay off your debts or make your life better. That's your job. And if you want to have purpose and meaning to the world, it's important that you do that. Grant does not feel that that's the way he should operate. And that's going to be very clear at the end of today's story. Now, when Grant wasn't live streaming, and we know that wasn't very often because he wasn't twitching at all, hardly, he was gaming. But when he wasn't gaming, he'd watch porn. And this is where really his life and his family's lives start to unravel. So through these pornographic excursions, he meets this Bulgarian cam girl named Sylvie, and he becomes absolutely infatuated with her. So he finds Sylvie through a website called My Free Cams. By the way, that should not be allowed to have free in the title. Just throwing it out there. If ever there is a description that is completely untrue, it's My Free Cams. So this is where models are paid for sexual images and videos, not free, quite costly. In fact, from the research I've done, super costly with respect. So this website, a bit like in the old days where you could ring somebody up on the phone and get charged an inordinate amount of money for having a chat with somebody at the end of the line and sharing your sexual fantasies with them, probably with an image in your head about how they look, which would be very different to the person that you're actually talking to. I mean, at the end of the day, you can't see down the telephone line, and voices don't always mirror the kind of look that you imagine they'll have in real life. But nonetheless, it was quite popular in the 1980s. You can probably still do it. You can probably still call people up on the phone. But we've moved on, haven't we? And now people use the web and webcam sites, etc. And this website, much like phone lines, charged users by the minute. By the minute! So it's going to be expensive. It doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to realise that you're going to be spending a wad of cash if you spend more than, 15 minutes on it. So he increasingly starts to spend more and more time watching her. He becomes obsessed and fixated with her. If she had been local to him, he would have been her stalker. Genuinely. That's what his behaviour's like. He just is totally transfixed by her. And he would spend most nights in private chats with Sylvie, which cost a lot of money, literally hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and he'd spend hours in them. Now, Grant, of course, wants to paint the picture that he's super successful. So he tells Sylvie that he's a rich professional video gamer, claims that he drives a BMW, and the way that he tries to keep this image up is by spending lots of money on Sylvie. So he's saying, this is who I am and I can prove it, because otherwise how would I be spending all this cash on you? He also would send her money. He buys her gifts. This is including lingerie, expensive lingerie, also sex toys that she could use whilst she was webcamming. And I think that that's to do with having a level of ownership over her, the fact that he can actually physically send items and then see her using those items. That will titillate him because it will feel like she is in some form of a relationship with him, even though clearly she isn't. She is literally just using him as a client so that she can make as much money as possible. Now, I will tell you, Sylvie was gorgeous. She had long, dark hair. She got a really beautiful figure. She got this really exotic Eastern European dialect, and clearly she seemed completely out of reach in reality for Grant. She would never have looked at him twice with respect. I know that sounds awful to say, but it's true. But for him, because he could pay her to act in a certain way, he could almost feed the delusion that he was forming. So Grant begins to believe that he's in some kind of real relationship with Sylvie. And he's just living in this fantasy life, meaning that he just spends more and more money on her. So on average, he would be spending $600 a night on Sylvie. A night. She was raking it in, wasn't she? Did Sylvie have a castle? One imagines she could afford a castle anyway. And he's not just involved with Sylvie, he's also involved in this group of men who would basically enter chat rooms to watch and chat to Sylvie, and they would all just try to out-tip each other. So they would literally see who could spend the most money, which, with respect again, means that Sylvie was doing well. She was bringing in a bomb, wasn't she? These guys spending a fortune, all trying to out-tip one another so that they become the objects of her attention for 5 seconds? Also, apparently they would request perverted poses and outfits and all the things that made them feel that they were standing out more than the guy next to them. They were spending more than the guy next to them. Grant also lied to this group, told them that he was this rich video gamer, and that again is all about enamoring himself to the group and speaks to that deep level of insecurity with him. At the end of the day, he's spending all this cash. That's all she cares about. She couldn't care less whether he's a bin man, a chef, or some video gamer. All she cares about is the dollar, of which he is giving her lots of. So essentially, this is all about creating this fantasy. He wants to believe that he's more. And in this virtual world, he can be and become more. It's all fake, but it's like it's absorbing him. He's starting to feel that maybe if you can carry on this total facade, this absolute charade, that maybe it will happen, maybe he'll become it. And that's deeply disturbing because it speaks of the fact that he just doesn't seem to have a grip. on what reality is. And it speaks of what I was saying about him being that narcissist, a person who is living with this knowledge that in reality, he's nothing like the persona he's portraying, but he's just desperate to cling on to it at any cost. Now, the way these interactions with Sylvie would work would be that he'd buy tokens. So he'd buy 5,000 tokens typically at a time, which costs $600. Sylvie's shows cost 90 tokens per minute. So if he watched for 4 hours, that basically added up to 21,600 tokens, and roughly that would work out at $2,500. So his desperation to keep Sylvie in his life meant that he needed to keep finding the cash so that he could carry on buying these tokens, so that he could keep spending this ridiculous amount of time with a woman he'd never met, ever, or would ever meet, because she's in a completely different country and she has literally no interest in him in reality. But he doesn't want to lose this connection, and so he starts stealing from the people who loved him most. Now, unfortunately, it can't go on forever. And eventually, Grant's father, Chad, discovers how much of his money Grant had spent, and he confronts him about this. At this point, Grant has nowhere to go, so he admits that, yes, I have been spending the money. And at this point, they pull back from allowing him to have any more expenditure on their cards. And it's at this point the family start to become really concerned about Grant's behaviour. So both Grant's mother and brother had rung 911 on the 20th of December because he went missing. And they were really concerned that what had happened between him and the family, his issues being raised, him having to admit what he'd been up to, the reality of the expenditure coming to the surface, that he might harm himself. But it turns out that even though they thought 100%, quote, that he was going to harm himself, he'd just gone to his aunt's, Donna Amato's, and she'd let him stay over. And she had actually said that when he arrived, she did feel that there was something wrong with him. But then, pretty soon afterwards, she starts seeing these bizarre charges in a bank account. She thinks that she's been hacked at that moment in time, but then figures out that it's Grant, who again has been using her financially. Now, Chad and Margaret find out about this and they begged Donna not to press charges. And his brother Cody also spent $15,000 for Grant to attend a 60-day pornography addiction program at a rehab centre. But before they actually sent him there, that same brother spent $10,000 so he and Grant and a friend could actually go on an already planned trip to Japan. I mean, Cody is a 1 in a million brother. And he'd just hoped that the vacation together would allow Grant to clear his head, get back into reality, realise that his actions had been really terrible and that he needed to realign himself with a reality that was going to be effective, as opposed to carrying on down this delusion and fantasy route that he'd been engaged in with this particular webcam girl. Now, after the 10-day trip, he goes into therapy, and the hope is that he's going to succeed there. So he attends his facility in Fort Lauderdale. It's for internet and sex addiction. He enters the facility on the 22nd of December 2018, but he only stays a few days. So on the 4th of January, Grant leaves the program. And this in itself, again, evidences what we're seeing about his personality. He does not commit to anything. I don't think he believes for a second he has a problem. I think he's bought into this idea that he's a better person than anybody else would believe, that people just don't get him in the way that they should, and that the only person that really understands him is this girl that he's paying thousands of dollars to actually be involved in. In his mindset, he's right and they're wrong. They are preventing this love story that he feels he is living to unfold how it should. They are the problem. His family are the barrier, and they are preventing him from having the happiness that he believes he deserves, even if the cost of that is on everybody else's shoulders. And in a letter that was later found, he told friends that he'd stayed in the facility until he was able to convince his family that he'd be fine and that he could be released. And bear in mind, Grant's family love him. They see the best in him. That's probably one of the most devastating parts of this case, that time and time and time and time again, they are trying to help him. They're trying to give him the opportunity to thrive. They're giving him new chances to make up for the behaviour, the letdown, and the problems it has caused, and to move forward in a positive way. And he just kicks them in the teeth every single time. And actually, all the while, somehow sees himself as the person who's been hard done to. Now, bear in mind, Grant's father, he had to delay his own retirement because he had to start paying off the debt that Grant had accumulated. We're talking about $200,000 of debt. We're not talking about a small amount. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a huge amount of money for anybody to spend, and to spend it in such a wasteful way. Imagine having that amount of money at your fingertips and just literally frittering it away as the webcam girl. And even worse, it's not his cash. Now, when he gets out of the sex addiction clinic, which has been the quickest recovery ever, and this does make me feel as well that he's incredibly manipulative, because he's done the most horrible thing to his family. He's been bailed out time and time again, and the only thing he needed to do was go to a rehab program so that he could be helped. He could actually heal. But he obviously doesn't see himself as unwell. So he manipulates his family into believing that he won't carry on acting in the way that he's previously acted, and they succumb to that manipulation and let him come home. Now, when he gets back, his dad is ready, and he decides that he's going to have to be very clear about what Grant needs to do if he wants to stay in the house. So Grant's father had actually written down rules as a contract, and this is specifically to make Grant recognise that he has to follow a particular protocol to remain at home. And also it's effective. If you sign to something, it often means that you feel more of a level of commitment to it. It's why we do this in therapy. We get you to sign a contract in therapy so that you feel as an adult or as a young person with respect that you are committed to a process. So Grant agrees to sign these, and these rules include things like you can't use the internet by yourself. Yes, Grant should definitely never be allowed anywhere near an internet connection per se for the rest of his life. He is proven to not be an individual who can control himself. But also, I kind of think, much like when somebody is serving a sentence in the community and is on tag, that this would be helpful for somebody like Grant. Maybe if he had like a tag around him that when he goes anywhere near a computer, there are fundamental different ways that you could do this. There could be, my personal favourite, he gets an electric shock, probably to the genital area, which prevents him from using said equipment. So he gets this like nice feedback, you know, behavioural conditioning. Some would say it wasn't very ethical. Some would say it wasn't ethical, but we're talking about Grant Amato here. I think it's something that we should definitely pursue. And the other is that maybe we would just scramble the internet connection, meaning he couldn't do it. Either way, his daddy is absolutely correct. He should not be allowed anywhere near the internet alone. Also, he wasn't allowed to have a smartphone. Makes perfect sense. It's another opportunity for him to get in contact with Sylvie. Then he's told that he's not allowed to contact Sylvie and that he has to pay back the debts from his family, which, with respect, will take him 2,000 years because it's a hell of a lot of money and he ain't got a job. But clearly his dad wants him to commit to these ideas. And Grant's father had apparently written on the list of rules, you chose a stranger physically non-existent over your family. Absolutely 100%. This guy has spent all the family's money to the point where his dad has to carry on working in spite of the fact that he should be able to retire because Grant has frittered it away on a woman who probably doesn't even know his name. He also had to do something that I think would have really affected the narcissist within him, which is he had to tell Sylvie in the community that he's involved in the truth about who he really was. And he wrote, I think it's safe to say by now that everyone here knows that I made a drastic mistake with Sylvie. I upset her, made her very sad, and ruined the end of December and beginning of January for her. I won't go into great detail because that's not the purpose of this message, but I lied to her and you guys from the beginning about myself. I am not a professional gamer, did not own my house, and did not drive a BMW. Now that would have been galling for this particular man. Because like I said, he's definitely got these narcissistic tendencies and he's somebody who's not wanting to be seen as humiliated because that's going to play into that insecurity within him. And also he's going to look foolish in front of the community and of course, most importantly, in front of the cam girl. But what really worries me about that message is it takes no responsibility, no accountability, and the only thing it is concerned with is the fact that he may have upset this woman who he spent a ridiculous amount of money on. The only reason that she would be upset is if he stopped using his credit card. Can we all be clear on that? But that would have been upsetting and humiliating for him. Now, whilst he agrees to these rules, shall we say they're not very easy for Grant to follow. He can't bear the fact that he's not in contact with Sylvie. This is incredibly difficult for him. He's built in this absolute fantasy that they're in some kind of relationship, and now he's not approved to get in contact with her. So it's something that's deeply disturbing for him, and apparently he becomes desperate to have some contact with Sylvie. Allegedly he begins to spiral into a deeper depression, and he'd actually written in a diary entry, "I'm unable to function normally without her, and I will never get over her." Listen, Grant, you are not in a relationship with her. I am in a relationship with her. I've written it in my diary. Grant, relationships do not involve your credit card and many miles between you and other men getting to command that same person to do all the things that they wish to do to her or for her to do for them. It's not how relationships work. It's how relationships work for me. Grant, you are a narcissist of the highest level, and you're going to be a very dangerous human being to be around. I don't care. I have a BMW, I have a castle, I have 2 leopards, and I can swim like a shark. I'm just going to walk away from you now, Grant. You're a disturbing human being. Genuinely, what is he going on about? He's not in a relationship with her. He's never been in a relationship with her. This is just absolute ludicrous fantasy that turns so grotesquely terrible that it's hard to wrap your head around it. Grant has got no indication whatsoever from Sylvie that they're in a relationship, aside from a relationship which is transactional. She's a sex worker. That's it. She's not a sex worker that's pretending to have a relationship with this guy and he has no idea what's going on when she's by herself. She is a sex worker because she advertises as a sex worker, and she takes financial transactions because she is a sex worker, and he's involved in a community with other men who use her as a sex worker, but he'll never get over her. He'll never get over her because obviously they had something special going, didn't they? Now, his family, they, in spite of everything he's done, are really worried about him because this depression is becoming very clear and they can't reach him. He just doesn't seem to be changing his mood or feeling any better in himself in spite of the fact that he's no longer having contact with Sylvie, etc. It seems to be doing the opposite. He seems to be getting more and more depressed, but arguably he's highly manipulative, isn't he? If you want to get people who are lovely and empathic, and bear in mind what I've told you about his mother, she's somebody who nurses broken horses back to health. She cares about people who are struggling without a shadow of a doubt. And the reality is this will be playing on her heartstrings. He's going to be able to seem like somebody who's vulnerable and desperate, and she's going to be buying into that and thinking, oh my God, what if something terrible happens to Grant because we have stopped him doing A, B, and C? That's what's so manipulative about him, because this is somebody who I do not believe for one moment has a shred of empathy in their body. Everything about Grant is what Grant wants, Grant will get, and he'll achieve that however. And if that means seeming really sad and down in the doldrums so that mummy feels sorry for me, he'll do it. And it'll be effective. And eventually, he's right. He convinces his mum to let him use her phone so that he can contact Sylvie. And his dad finds out and is incandescent with rage. Of course he is. He knows what this trajectory is about. He knows where it's going. He knows where it will end up. And inevitably, it will end up costing the family a fortune. So he's got to that point now. And his dad thinks to himself, well, I'm going to take some serious action. He's broken the contract. So he says to Grant, you need to move out. You haven't followed the rules that we've set for you. You haven't committed to doing what we agreed. So the consequences are going to be grave. You have to leave. And I think that Dad is 100% correct in that action, because the thing about Grant is so far he has not had any consequences. He's always allowed to get away with things and then people save him from the consequences. So on the 24th of January, Grant's kicked out of the family home. And that must have been unbelievably challenging for his family, because they have gone above and beyond for Grant time and time again. The effort that they've gone to protect him has been clear in what I've told you so far. And they must feel so let down that in spite of this, he has failed to just consider their feelings, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that he is not necessarily just being protected from himself by being prevented to go on the internet and so on and so forth. He's being prevented from destroying the family further, and he has no care about that. He is not showing any remorse, any concern, any actual responsibility for stealing so much money from the family. He just wants to repeat the cycle. They are a sacrifice worth making when it comes down to finances, and sadly, in general, his family are a sacrifice worth making if it gets him what he wants. So after he's thrown out, just a day later, that's right, just a day later, the police are called to the family home. Cody Amato's failed to turn up to work on the 25th of January 2019, and this is 100% out of character. And his co-workers are immediately very concerned because Cody was the type of person who actually ended up arriving early at work. So for him to not turn up at all or even be late is very out of character. And they tried to get in contact with him because it's very unusual and there's no response. So his co-workers then contact Cody's girlfriend, but she's also failed to make any contact with him. Now everyone's really worried because this is not how Cody acts. And there is that unsettling feeling that something badly wrong has happened. So they contact the police in Chuluota and they ask them to go and check on him at his family home. And the police arrive to do that check at 9:17 a.m. And as they enter the house, the police are absolutely blindsided because what they're about to see is something very unusual. When we talk about people murdering their families, it's so rare. And no matter how dyed in the wool you are as an officer, you're never prepared to see the bodies of an entire family in front of you. So first of all, they find the body of Cody's father, 59-year-old Chad Amato. He's lying face up on the kitchen floor. They can instantly see that he's dead and that he's died of a gunshot wound. Then they find the body of 31-year-old Cody on the floor in the storage room. And then finally, they find the body of Cody's mother, 61-year-old Margaret Amato. Her body was slumped over the office desk. She seemed to have a gunshot wound on her head. The family was said by the investigators to have been killed execution style. And the whole family at this point, to the investigators, seems to have been annihilated. But there's one family member still missing. Grant Amato was nowhere to be seen. The sheriff's office released the name of 29-year-old Grant Amato as a person of interest later on in the day because it's very suspicious that this particular family member is nowhere to be seen, and yet all of the other family members in that household are now dead. They also go ahead and release the model of his car and the number plate because they want to locate Grant as quickly as possible. And the sheriff went into a press conference and said, it looks like the person who's responsible was known to the family, and we're going to do everything we can to ensure that we get that person in custody very, very soon. It's a message, isn't it, straight away? It's saying, we know exactly who did this. It's just a matter of time before we catch them. And they even go so far as to warn the public that Grant should be considered armed and dangerous. So from the get-go, they're only looking in one direction, and that is clearly Grant Amato's direction. And because they feel that he may be armed and dangerous, they urge the public to call 911 if they see him and told them not to actually approach him. It doesn't take long. Grant Amato is located by the police and found at a nearby hotel. So there'd been this overnight search, and it turns out he was staying at a DoubleTree hotel in Orange County. At this point, they take him in for questioning. Now, bear in mind, just going to throw it out there. If I was at a hotel, and I don't know, there's a knock on the door, I open the door, and it's armed police there, the first thing I'm going to do is going to be like, yeah, what the hell is going on here? At the end of the day, I'm just having a spa weekend. What are you doing? Knocking on my door. Is anybody injured that I know? Obviously, that would be what was going through your head. But then if the police were like, you need to come in for questioning, you'd be like, okay, why? Why am I going in for questioning? I've done nothing. I've just literally had a mud pack on my face, a nice swim, and I wanted to go down and have the all-inclusive buffet breakfast. And you're now removing me from my room in my white toweling robe, taking me to the police station. I need to know why. But no, not Grant. Grant doesn't feel the need to say to the police, why are you taking me in for questioning? So during questioning, he not only has been taken from his hotel without saying what's going on, he's really calm. Now again, doesn't make sense. If you've now been taken to, shall we say, be lightly interrogated at this point, you're going to be nervous. And this is why I believe that Grant has so many problematic and dysfunctional characteristics in his personality. Because like I said, you should be scared. You should be anxious. And if you think about the brain operating as it should do in this circumstance, that's what you would expect to see. Somebody who is feeling on edge, somebody who is scared, somebody who is sad, any of these feelings would do. But calm, relaxed, particularly in light of the crimes that we know have played out, that feels a real juxtaposition to what we'd expect to see. And again, that plays into the idea of certain areas of the brain not communicating effectively, namely the ventral medial prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And we see that where psychopaths are concerned. They just don't have the connection working properly with empathy and guilt and fear and anxiety. And for me, this is demonstrated in Grant's behaviour. Now, his interrogation lasted several hours, and 3 hours into the interrogation, he still hadn't asked what had happened to his family or why he was there. So he's literally spent 3 hours being questioned and still hasn't actually asked what's played out. Eventually, when they confront him with pictures of his dead family, Grant teared up, but claimed he had nothing to do with it.
Left the house later than what I had said.
Did you leave the house with your brother Cody looking like that? Or did you leave the house with your father looking like that? Or your mother? Is that how you left your family?
If you are being questioned by interrogators in a situation where your family have been murdered, wiped out, you are going to see those pictures and be damn near hysterical, or in a situation where you say it's not real, you disbelieve it, you try to deny and reject it. You're not going to be calm and relaxed and then just tear up a little bit. That is not contextual whatsoever with our expectation emotionally and psychologically in such a situation. Grant, of course, says, I had nothing to do with this. Don't know anything about it. But you know what? I figured it out for you. That feels very convenient. Grant, can you tell us what you think played out? I can. I think you'll find that it was Cody, my brother, who murdered my mother and father in a murder-suicide. That's what I think. Feels very convenient because that would suggest that you had nothing to do with it. It's exactly what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that I had nothing to do with it. But we don't really think there was any motive for Cody to kill your parents. I mean, he seemed to be like a really stand-up, great kind of guy. He does. But you see, it's those really stand-up, great kind of guys that you have to really worry about. I'm pretty sure that they're the ones that you don't have to worry about. I'm more sure that it tends to be contextually correct that somebody who, I don't know, owes the family $200,000, imagines that they're in a relationship with some weird cam girl in an Eastern European country and who pretends to everybody that he drives the BMW and is a video gamer, that they're more likely to be the person who goes ahead and wipes out their entire family trying to stage a murder-suicide when in fact they were just the murderer. That does seem very recent. Have you ever watched me on Twitch? I'm really good. You should, maybe we should do that. Why don't we just do some gaming for a bit instead of talking about this? Because I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable and I don't want to be implicated in what was clearly a murder-suicide by my brother. But anyway, this is what he does. I'm not sure that he asked the detective to join him in the Twitch stream. I wouldn't put it past him though. But he just denies it full stop and points the finger at Cody. And he said that when he was ordered to leave the house by his father, Cody ominously told him that he would take care of it. So now he's saying that the reason that Cody's wiped out his entire family and himself is because his father had thrown Grant out. I kid you not. People like Grant are the most terrifying human beings in the world, because the idea that he can firstly get away with this speaks for itself as somebody who is unhinged in many ways. But the fact that he would wish to reputationally damage the brother who has saved him on numerous occasions, taken him to Japan, helped to pay for him to be rehabilitated, paid off some of his debts in spite of the fact that that same brother had spent a fortune on Cody's credit cards. The reality is that he now wants to reputationally sully Cody by suggesting that he would have heroically murdered his parents to protect Grant and also killed himself. Makes no sense. But he's cool, calm, calculating and cold as hell when you imagine what Grant is trying to achieve. And of course, the investigators think it's absolute BS. And they're not surprised by the way that he tells the story, because clearly this is what Grant has wanted to portray, this idea that there's been a murder-suicide because the crime scene's been set up to present itself as a murder-suicide. So Cody's body been turned over and also a gun holster was placed on Cody's left hip. Sadly though, for Grant at least, the holster wasn't placed on the correct side, as Cody would have actually been a right-handed gun holder. So he didn't think it through when he was staging the murder scene. Towards the end of this quite long interrogation, the police, as a last resort, actually had Grant's older brother Jason come in and talk to him. And in that interrogation, it's clear that Jason is beseeching Grant to be honest and also to understand that he'll still love him no matter what he's done. So he's given him this opportunity to come clean and to acknowledge the killings, and also to understand that in doing so, he won't be rejected by Jason.
All right, so I think you know what happened. Yeah. I'm going to ask you plain out. You are not part of it anyway. No. I don't know. I want to believe you, Grant, but you're the last person that I could put in that house. And I know what happened over the last 6 months. I can understand the troubles that you've gone through. But it's hard for me to think that you would break to this point. But who else can I blame? How are we going to find out who did this?
I don't know. I don't have the answers.
I love you more than anything in this world, just like I love Cody, Grant, and Dad. I know Dad was an asshole. I know Cody was an asshole. But they were our family, and they would have never done anything to hurt us. I'm sorry. I don't believe you.
But he didn't come clean. So at this point, he gets arrested on 3 charges of first-degree murder. Now, despite the investigators' suspicions being on Grant, one of the things that I'll say is there was initially no concrete evidence that tied Grant to the murders. And that's a problem, because if you don't have concrete evidence that can connect you with the murders, then you can't hold that person. And rightly so. There should be some evidence for you to actually get locked up. So because they haven't got anything concrete, they have to release Grant the next day after his arrest. This investigation obviously carries on, and it's at this point that the investigators start realising that all was not well in the Amato family household. They start uncovering all these problems. So the family tell the investigators of the $200,000 debt that Grant's accumulated. That in itself is a motive. It's as clear as day. Also, the police are told about the fact that Grant had a really strange relationship, particularly with his father, and that his father had asked him recently to move out because he'd been back in contact with Sylvie. Then when they interviewed Grant's older brother, Jason, he tells the police about that obsession that he's developed with Sylvie and how that's been the thing that's ultimately led to the debts. So now they really feel that they do have a motive. And during their investigation, Cody, Amato's girlfriend, she's also interviewed, and she again gives some more insight into what's been going on with the family. And she described Grant's life as going downhill after he lost his nursing job. She also informed the police about Grant's relationship with Sylvie, how he was stealing the family's money. She told the police that he'd stolen $60,000 off Cody himself. And she also said that Grant had stolen firearms from Cody and went on to sell these without Cody's permission. So this guy doesn't have any morals. He's not got any scruples at all. He will steal from his nearest and dearest, whatever is required to get whatever he needs. She also went on to say that Cody had expressed concern that Grant would kill everyone. What a horrible intuition Cody had. And this is the guy who has bailed out Grant so often, and yet all the while, in the pit of his stomach, he's had this ultimate fear that one day Grant could turn on the family and kill them all. I mean, that is harrowing beyond belief. And it makes you think, what is it about people who can almost foresee these kind of horrific events play out, but because they don't want to believe it's possible in spite of that intuition occurring, they just put it to the back of their mind. They might talk about it, but then they swallow it down, believing that maybe it's just their worst fears as opposed to anything that could truly play out in reality. But if only Cody had actually taken that intuition seriously, who knows how this could have played out? Because ultimately, he saw that Grant had the potential to kill. And more than that, not just had the potential to kill, but had the potential to kill his family. Now, eventually, unfortunately, the police were able to find evidence which placed Grant at the crime scene. So first of all, they find a thumb drive among Grant's possessions, and the thumb drive had been connected to the computer in the Amato home the day that the murders happened. So there's Grant's alibi that he wasn't present at the home, gone for a burn. And it had been connected at 11:32 p.m. on the 24th of January. And that's when the investigators believe the murders had just taken place, so just hours after. And you won't be surprised to hear that this thumb drive contained hundreds of pictures of Sylvie. Of course it did. What else would we imagine for it to contain? So now the investigators are able to place Grant at the crime scene on the night that the murders happened. So at this point, he gets arrested just a few days after the bodies had been found. So it's quite a quick process, and the investigators must have been relieved, because if you can execute your entire family, then hell, you can execute anyone. So Grant at this point is charged with 3 counts of premeditated first-degree murder, and the judge, understandably and correctly, refuses bond for the massive murder of Grant. Whilst in jail, Grant decides that it's probably a good idea if he gets in contact with filmmakers and writers. I kid you not. I mean, if I was just being arrested and placed in remand for the murder of my entire family, you can bet your bottom dollar the first person I'm going to be thinking about is a filmmaker or a writer. They're the obvious choice. Forget family members, forget friends. Why not go straight to the jugular and think about how you can create a Hollywood biopic on the murders? That's literally what he does. So he gets in contact with this filmmaker and this writer in New York, and in both, he's speaking of this struggle that he has to fund the bail. And he actually writes to one of them, I'm hoping someone can help me out with this, because I've done all that I can to reach out and try to procure the funds necessary. And then in another, he says, if you happen to know any millionaires who would like to post my bond, I'd be eternally grateful, and I'd give you exclusive rights for my story. I mean, if I, as a millionaire, am not spending all of my time thinking, well, I do hope that some inmate somewhere is going to want me to spend my millions on them so that they can give me exclusive access to their murder story, I don't know what I'm doing as a millionaire. It's an obvious choice. I imagine once that email arrived, that filmmaker and writer were like, oh, I'll just hit up all my millionaire friends and see how many of them want to bid for this story. Delusional. Grant is delusional, but nonetheless, this is what he's hoping, and he'll be eternally grateful. Remember that. Eternally grateful. How are you going to pay me back? I'm going to be eternally grateful. But that's not going to be financially lucrative for me. No. But I'm very special. I'm a very special person, and I will be eternally grateful. And my eternal gratitude is better than everybody else's eternal gratitude. Just go with me on this. I'll be eternally grateful. Turns out his eternal gratitude wasn't enough to wash, and he didn't get bail, unsurprisingly. But there again, remember, he is in a relationship with this Eastern European sex worker, Sylvie, and even though she doesn't know it, he does. And that's all that matters. He also said during these interactions that the webcam model, who he believed himself to be in a relationship with, had nothing to do with anything that's happened. I don't think the investigators were trying to pin the murders on a woman in a different country. It's just absolutely bizarre, isn't it? Absolutely bonkers that this guy genuinely feels the need to act in some heroic display of commitment to this woman by stating that she wasn't involved. Of course she wasn't involved. She probably doesn't even know who you are anymore. We get to Grant's trial. This occurred at the Seminole County Courthouse in the summer of 2019. And prosecutors put together a series of events that they believed happened, so how things had played out. So understandably, it begins with the rage that they feel Grant felt towards his family because they'd stopped him speaking to Sylvie, they'd withdrawn his opportunity to funds, and they'd obviously ordered him to leave the home. So now any opportunity to be in contact with her has been thwarted. So they say that he came into the family home around 5:30 p.m. on the 24th of January and that he would have shot his mother from behind in the head as she worked at her desk. Then he would wait till his father came home and then shot him in the kitchen. And the gunshot actually went through the side of his head, but it wasn't fatal. So then Grant stood over him and just shot him a second time. And this time it was a fatal shot to the head, but that's absolute execution style. And they then say that he actually used his father's thumbprint to unlock his father's phone. This is when he messages Cody from his father's phone, and the whole premise of this is to lure Cody back to the home. And they believe that Grant stayed in the house with the bodies for hours, waiting until Cody arrived in that home, which is so deeply malevolent. It is horrible. Just to even conceive that this guy has literally blown his parents to death, blasted them at immediate range, and then created this story to get Cody home so he can ultimately take his life too. The brother who's done everything in his power to help him. So when Cody arrived home, he entered the house through the storage room and Grant immediately shoots him in the face. And again, how dehumanizing. The brother that had loved him, that had grown up with him, that had had dreams shared with him. And he pays him back by shooting him in the face. Now, after he has shot his brother, Grant then tries to frame Cody for the murders by planting the gun and the holster on Cody's body to make it look like he's taken his own life after murdering his parents. Now, during Grant's trial, the thumb drive was used as vital evidence. Of course it was, because at the end of the day, it shows he was clearly at the property hours after the murders had taken place, which would mean that he would know the bodies were there if he'd had nothing to do with it and would have got in touch with the authorities, or alternatively, is the actual murderer. And clearly that's what we're talking about, that he is the murderer. That's why he's there. The state also introduced evidence that showed Grant had tried to actually wipe his brother's cell phone after the murders. So he's planning on trying to get away by making sure that those messages potentially between his father and his brother, which would have lured him back to the property, were erased. In addition, there was a forensic investigator that said on the night of the murders, Cody's iPhone had actually been attempted to be connected to Grant's computer. And this process wasn't completed, which means that the person who was trying to make the connection probably didn't have the correct password. Again, implicating Grant. So the prosecution introducing all this forensic evidence was all about proving that it was Grant, without a shadow of a doubt, who had committed the murders. Also, there was gunshot residue, which was found on Grant's gloves and cuffs. So that's implicating him as well. And the prosecution said that there was a 1 in 700 billion chance at that being someone else's. So bang to rights as far as I'm concerned. Doesn't matter that Grant's saying I didn't do it. This is all very strong evidence that ultimately is pointing that he is the perpetrator. They also had Jennifer Sawyer testify. So she's somebody who lived close to the Amato house. And she said that she'd heard gunshots between 8:30 and 9:30 p.m. on the 24th of January. She said, I heard them one right after the other, and I know it was less than 5 shots fired. And apparently this had matched the timeline that had been drawn up by the prosecution. The prosecution said that everything points to the defendant in this case and nobody else. Also, Jericho Fine, who was a long-term friend of Grant Amato and Cody Amato, he testified that the three of them went on that trip to Japan. So he was the friend who went with them, and they went for much of December. And this was a month before the shootings. He said that the brothers did love one another, but he did detect on that trip that there was some tension with them. So he said, especially when Grant Amato disappeared for 2 hours. And he found them at Appuccino, a gambling building. And at the time, he also went and used his tablet and the Wi-Fi in that building. But then, not long after, he discovered that one of his cards had been used to make unauthorised charges. And he said one of the charges went through, but the other two were denied. And they were for My Free Cam tokens, he said. So we can all imagine who was responsible for hacking in to his financial data and using it for his own opportunities. It's going to be Grant, isn't it? So again, what kind of morals did Grant have? That the moment he gets an opportunity to steal from his friend that he's travelling with, he takes it. Then another friend, Blake Turpin, he testified that he'd reported his 9mm gun and ammunition stolen because he'd cleaned out his closet and realised it wasn't there. And he said the last person who was in that room where the gun was stored was Grant Amato, and that was 2 weeks before the shooting. So again, demonstrates the kind of character we're dealing with where Grant Amato is concerned. Now, during the trial, of course, Grant continues to maintain his innocence. He pled not guilty to all the charges against him. And I will say that his defence had previously asked the judge for an acquittal. They said that there was no case to answer. It was denied. I don't quite know where the defence were going with this, but they felt that there was not enough evidence and that essentially the judge should throw it out before it even got to court. And this is because they said there was a lack of physical evidence. I don't know whether there's a lack of physical evidence. I think $200,000 in debt and a fixation and delusion about a webcam model that he's not allowed to speak to anymore is motive enough. I know it's not physical evidence as in forensic DNA, etc., but it's pretty physical. There's a massive bank trail. I'm just throwing it out there that where there is a motive, there is often motion. So Grant's public defender, Jeff Dowdy, told the judge there has been absolutely nothing, not a scintilla of physical evidence that links him to these murders. I think you're playing a little bit with the truth there, aren't you, Mr. Jeff Dowdy? I think what you're trying to say is we haven't got something that places him directly on a physical level at the scene of the crime, like fingerprints on the gun or forensic detail on the bodies, but we do have a plethora of evidence that says why he'd want his family dead and the kind of human being that he is, which isn't a very nice one, with respect. Also, can we all acknowledge that Grant was somebody who was medically trained? It's not very difficult to forensically ensure that you are not passing this kind of information on to your victims. Wear a suit that is designed to be disposed of afterwards, which you can have access to, that prevents contamination. Wear gloves that prevent contamination. Make sure that you clean yourself down accordingly. Make sure that you clean down the items of the guns, etc. that you've used. These are things that you can do. And if you're medical, you are going to know how to do it and you're going to have the wherewithal to go through with it. Because if you're planning the absolute execution of your family, you want to get away with it, and you have medical background knowledge, you're not going to ignore that when executing the crime, and in this case, executing your family. So during the trial, the defence argued that there is no DNA evidence. They also accused the investigators of having tunnel vision, that Grant was guilty, and said that this is what guided their investigation and their interpretation of the crime scene. So basically they went, you have decided that Grant is guilty. And the investigators are like, yes, we have. Well, that's tunnel vision, and you should be looking at other people too. There are no other suspects in this crime. We have him banged to rights, basically. His history, his behaviour, the fact that he didn't even ask why he was being taken in to the interrogation speaks for itself. So yes, we were only looking at Grant. Well, we think you should look at everybody else. Do you think it could be Sylvie? We think it could be Sylvie. He said it isn't Sylvie. She's in Eastern Europe, but it could well have been Sylvie. We're saying we're quite suspicious of Sylvie. Honestly, Yes, I know, we've always got to be careful. We've got to be impartial where crime is concerned. You shouldn't fixate on just one suspect unless you know that suspect is a person who's suspected because they're guilty. And in this case, Grant's guilty, without a shadow of a doubt. That's why they didn't waste the time looking at everybody else. Now, during the trial, Grant's older brother, who has obviously lost horrifically, can we all be aware of that? He has lost his family, his awesome mother, his great adoptive dad, his gorgeous brother. They've all been wiped out, and that is horrific. And when he gives his victim impact statement, he breaks down because he recalls the moment he learned of the deaths of his family members, and you cannot imagine how blindsiding that would be.
It was pretty scary. So they, came into the building, and the whole building got shut down, and there were police officers everywhere. They took me into a room and, questioned me, and later gave me very general details that there was a woman and two males in their 30s found in the house. So I just tried to answer. No, I'm good. So I just tried to answer their questions as best as possible.
He said, though they're gone, I want people to know that Chad, Margaret and Cody were amazing people. And he even said that despite what Grant had done, he still loves him. I marvel at people like that. I really do. I marvel. I think it is psychologically near impossible to care in any way, shape or form for somebody who does something so grotesque and extreme, who steals your future with your family from you, who prevents your brother, Cody, from going on to have children of his own, therefore stealing an entire generation. To be able to still look at the human being who did that to you, who took everything of meaning from your life to such a degree, and to still feel compassion and love for them, it speaks volumes about that human being. I don't think that I could do that. I genuinely don't. I think that I'd be somebody who not necessarily would be bitter and resentful, but would have to close the door on the relationship. I just would want to compartmentalize it, to put it somewhere in storage and never go there again. But like I said, this family, aside from Grant, were incredibly compassionate, loving people. You only have to think about how forgiving they were to Grant and their behaviours bringing those boys up that demonstrates that it makes sense that Jason would be this way, that he's very much his mother's son and has a great deal of love in his heart, even when somebody does something so awful to him and to the people that he loved. Cody's co-worker and girlfriend, they also gave statements, and they just talked about what a great guy Cody was. His co-worker said that they missed the positive attitude that he brought, and his girlfriend described Cody as an incredible, great person, talked about how he gave her so much. Now, I will say Grant Amato broke down as he listened to the victim impact statements, including the one from his brother, but with respect, I would imagine that's because the game's up and he realises that they were all very positive towards his family and weren't necessarily that positive towards him, albeit that his brother said that he would still love him. I imagine that brought into sharp focus the reality of what Grant Amato was facing, which was, I don't know, death or a life in prison. So not the best of outcomes for a narcissist per se. When it comes down to the jury, they found Grant Amato guilty of all 3 counts of first-degree murder. This was at approximately 10 p.m. on the 31st of July 2019. And family members were seen weeping as the verdict was given to Grant. But Grant was just emotionless as he was given the verdict. And I completely appreciate that for the family, this would be just such an emotional moment because there's no winners. So Grant doesn't win. His life is over as he knew it. And what for? Why? There's almost the futility of that loss. It didn't need to happen. It was unnecessary. It's just created the worst, not the best, when it comes down to the future for all parties. 3 people had their lives ended because of this man's selfishness. And this selfish man will be paid back by spending the rest of his life in prison, or the jury could have found him guilty to a point where he would have been sentenced to death. The fact that he's emotionless one could say, well, potentially that's because he's in shock or numb. But I just think it's because he expected it fully. He knows he's guilty as hell. And he hasn't got empathy in the way that you or I would experience it. So why would he react? They get to Grant's sentencing. This occurs on the 12th of August. The prosecution, well, they are very clear. They want Grant to be given the death penalty. They feel that what he did was so extremely wicked that it absolutely deserves the death penalty. So they urge the jurors to vote for it. They said the murders were cold, they were calculated, they were premeditated, and they asked the jury to consider the brutality that Grant had shown. He didn't show any mercy to his family, so why should he be shown mercy by anyone else? Now, the defence, understandably, they urged the jury not to vote for the death penalty. They want their client to survive, and they said that life in prison without parole would be suitable. He hadn't got a criminal record before this particular action. Although, just throwing it out there, he should have had, because he did steal from his employer and potentially was over-medicating people that he wasn't qualified to over-medicate, or he was taking them himself, or he was selling them. But yeah, he didn't get criminally convicted because he got bailed out by his family, but he actually did do something criminal. Just throwing it out there. But on a mitigation level, the court did not have a criminal record to say that that had played out. Therefore, understandably, the defence used that appropriately, saying to the jurors, listen, he'd never even had a slap on the wrist until this point, so putting him to death wouldn't be fair, because this is out of character for this kind of individual when you look at his past. Although, like I said, we all know that his past was pretty shady, just in light of what he did to his own family before killing them, such as robbing them blind, and so on and so forth. Now, for Grant Amato to be put to death, the jury would need to be unanimous on the decision. So if they're going to give him the death penalty, they all had to agree, but they didn't. So the 12 jurors who found Grant Amato guilty of first-degree murder on the 31st of July, they deliberated for about 3 hours, but they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. And that meant that he couldn't be given the death penalty. So when it came to sentencing, Judge Jessica Rexedler, she sentenced Grant to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for each murder. He still maintains that he wasn't responsible for the murders. But there again, he maintained that he was in a relationship with a webcam girl in Eastern Europe who only required hundreds of thousands of dollars to remain in his life. So I don't think we can go down the trajectory of believing what Grant says to be true. Following his sentencing, he said, my family's been blaming me for months for ruining their lives, stealing and not following the rules of the home, so I might as well be blamed for this too. Sorry, can somebody get the enormous amount of tasers out, please? Just maybe some violent torture equipment, because this guy really does take the biscuit, and we do need to think very, very clearly about some alternative punishments for individuals who refuse to take accountability and responsibility for heinous crimes. Just throwing it out there. Sorry, I'm in my own little world of fantasy, aren't I? Not quite in the realm of fantasy that Grant Amato lives in, but nonetheless, a little bit of a fantasy there, because that really annoys me. To say my family have been blaming me for months for ruining their lives, stealing and not following the rules of their home, so I might as well be blamed for this too. Oh, you're the victim. And by the way, no innocent person says that ever. No innocent person is like, well, my family don't like me very much anyway, so you may as well send me to prison for the rest of my natural life. At the end of the day, it's just par for the course. No one says that. It's not even on your mind. You're like, I'm innocent, there's a horrible miscarriage of justice going on, I'm innocent. You're not getting yourself into a position where the victim mentality may as well have an illuminated sign above your head just saying victim mentality, with one just coming up under the chin saying massive narcissist, maybe one to the side with psychopath, maybe all of them at the same time. Genuinely, Grant Amato is the worst of humanity, because they're the kind of individuals who bleed you dry, devastate your life, make your world fall apart into a million smithereens, and then step over the mess and walk past you without a care or concern in the world so that they can carry on wrecking somebody else's world next. And Grant Amato would have done that if he hadn't done what we're talking about today. Also, when it came down to his family, they aren't convinced of his innocence. It's not as if he saying this stuff and acting like the victim is making them think, well, maybe they got it wrong. Maybe it's turned out that the defence are right. Maybe he's completely innocent. No. So his own grandmother, she agreed with the jury and she believes that Grant is responsible for the murder. She said, that kid did it. Grant killed them. 100%. That's true, without a doubt. There is nothing that I have covered in my research that has made me question the legitimacy of his guilt. He's absolutely 1 billion %. I appreciate there's only 100%, but I just feel like for artistic license, I'm going to say 1 billion % guilty. This guy absolutely murdered 3 members of his loving family because essentially they didn't play the game of life the way he wished for them to play the game of life. Now, after the sentencing, of course, Grant Amato tries to appeal his sentence, and wow, they did appeal on quite a lot of grounds. So this included speculative digital evidence. Do you mean the forensic evidence that actually pins him at the murders, literally within an hour or so afterwards he's online there? Yes, that. It's speculative. They're speculating it was him. But it's his technology. Somebody else could have had his technology. It's linked to him. No, that's speculative. Somebody could have got his technology, gone to the home, killed his family, gone online. It's as simple as that. It's speculative. They also criticised what was actually brought in and allowed in evidence. What, you mean like the evidence that was brought in to get him found guilty? Yes, I'm very angry about the fact that you brought things in that made the jury think he was guilty. I think that's called a court case. Well, we're not happy with it. We're appealing it. Also, they were unhappy that a theory had been suggested about the gun itself. So they'd painted this picture of a story and the defence didn't think that was fair. And his attorney said, we think the appellate issues we are raising are very viable and we hope that we can try the case again. I bet you did, but you weren't allowed to. It was unsuccessful, and this means that Grant is currently serving his sentence forever at the Holmes Correctional Institute in Florida. And I doubt Sylvie is keeping in contact with him there. This case is one of those that is blindsiding, isn't it? Because like I said at the very beginning, we're talking about 3 members of the same family. And look, I don't know them. I don't know anything about their history apart from what I've been able to research. But let me tell you, anybody would want a family like the Amatos, anyone. If you are blessed and fortunate enough to be in a situation where not only are you loved, but you are brought up with the privileges and opportunities that the money they'd earn could offer you, but also drenched in the love that they gave you and ultimately forgiven time and time again for the mistakes that you made. That kind of a family is rare, and that absolutely embodies what pretty much every member of the Amato family is like, aside from Grant Amato. And this is the problem. When it comes down to nature and nurture, I appreciate that some people will say 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. For me, sometimes genetics, the way you're hardwired in your system, it outweighs every other thing. I think Grant Amato is a narcissistic psychopath. I think he's someone who is fractured to his very foundation. He is rotten to his very core. He is selfish beyond a selfishness that most of us will ever come into contact with in our worlds and lives. He's a con artist. He's a killer. And I'm glad that he'll never walk the streets again. And I think the day that he takes his last breath will be the day that, shall I say, he gets hot and heavy again. But this time, it won't be with a sex worker in Eastern Europe. It will be with the big DEVIL down below. And he's deserving of that day and outcome. Let me know your thoughts on this case. If you've known it before, I hope I've given you a bit of information that you might not have had. and I'd love to hear your comments. So write them in the comments below, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, guys. Be safe.